Oh, I wasn't talking to you, I'm sorry. Welcome back to Spooky Saturdays. We are going a month strong so far, and I personally am really proud of us. If you're coming from TikTok, thank you so much. If you're coming from Instagram, wow, thank you. And if you're a subscriber on YouTube already, special thanks to you. You get the best thank you, and you get the best hello. See what being a subscriber gets you? You get so much more enthusiasm. It's worth it. It's so worth it. Just desperately begging for sub. I'm sorry. Desperation's unattractive. Anyway, we're gonna be talking about one of the oldest cold cases in American history, though there was a somewhat recent update. Today, we're going to be talking about the mystery of the Roanoke Colony. Where did it go? What happened? There's a lot of theories. A lot of people just assume they were absorbed by the neighboring tribe, but actually there's significantly more drama than I think most people realize, which isn't surprising with a colonial settlement. Our timeline's 1587 through 1590. Most of you are likely familiar with the TLDR version of the Roanoke mystery, which is basically that England wanted to colonize what is formerly known as Turtle Island, currently known as the United States of America, and they arrived off the coast of North Carolina on a small island called Roanoke, and they decided this is gonna be the place, we're gonna settle here. They didn't have enough supplies, and it was a total disaster. The entire colony ends up disappearing, and everyone's like, what the f? Where did they go? We lost like over 100 people, and all that was left behind was a cryptic message on a tree that said crow, and then on a post that said Croatoan. And so everyone was like, whoa, what does it all mean? You might be like, okay, so now I know what happened, let me click away. No, don't click away. There's so much more than that, and there's so many like key players and stuff. It's actually significantly more interesting than you may be thinking. Basically, just like, trust me, bro. One of our main characters is a guy named Sir Walter Raleigh. He is basically like king colonizer in this situation. He was given a colonization permit. They used to make those from Queen Elizabeth. Like, you have till 1591 to create a colony somewhere in America. Figure it out. I literally don't care. Just get a foothold established. If you don't do it by then, you know, your permit expired, and Queen Elizabeth would either invest in a different colonizer, or she would be like, you gotta re-up on this permit, bro. So that's his general timeline. He's like, okay. So he immediately starts getting to work. He starts fundraising, he starts getting all of his ships together, he starts getting his crew together, and this initial expedition that he's planning out is gonna be like pretty militant. He wants to have like 600 guys, they all know how to fight, he doesn't know what to expect, so he's preparing for anything. But before he can do all of that, before he can actually begin to settle the area, he has to send out some guys to do some recon. He needs to know what he's up against, he needs to find a good spot. In 1584, he launches his first recon to Turtle Island. And for anybody who's confused why I'm calling it Turtle Island, that's what the native community considers North America to be. So that's what I'm calling it, because this is pre-colonization. And also, if you look at a map of the United States, it does look like a turtle. Kind of fun, right? He sends 2 ships out to what we now refer to as the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Pretty popular vacay spot. So he sends out his guys, they're looking around, they meet the local natives in the area, and actually everybody's getting along pretty well. Allegedly. Every time that I hear that settlers were getting along really well with natives, I do feel like the need to make a disclaimer that like, that might not be true. That might just be the white perspective on things. At the very least, we know for a fact at this point, there wasn't any sort of violence between the colonizing recon ships and the local natives. If this testimonial is all correct, then apparently they met the local natives, and everybody got along like really well. They were actually having a really great time. The natives were like, oh, here's all the natural resources. This is where we get our food. This is where we hunt. They're basically just giving them like a sick tour of the area. And they were like, we actually don't live on the mainland. We live on this island called Roanoke Island. You should come with us to the island. So they go across the channel, they look at the island, they show them their way of life, and they're really impressed. They're like, dude, this is gonna be awesome. Do we have you guys' permission to move in? And allegedly, they're like, yeah, dude, we're bros now. Bring your people over here. Sir Walter hears this and he's like, dude, that's sick. I'm gonna launch my settlement expedition then. This is gonna be awesome. And everyone who went on the recon mission was like, yeah, dude, it's like a sick time. It is gonna be awesome. Everyone who's already there, super chill. Everyone who we're bringing, super chill. Gonna be a chill time. Brofest. In 1585, he starts embarking. Sir Walter sends 7 ships, 600 men, and a whole host of supplies. All of these supplies are supposed to last these 600 men about a full calendar year, and then at that point they're expecting that Queen Elizabeth is going to send another ship full of supplies so that they can re-up, just in case they haven't like put down roots adequately, or maybe they had a harsh winter and they're just like not doing as well as they expect. They're planning to have more supplies sent just in case, just to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. So the voyage goes pretty well as it can go, going across high seas and everything. Everyone's getting along, minimal deaths and whatnot. They get to North Carolina, they're in the Outer Banks, and then their flagship, which for those of you who don't know, I'm sure context clues, a lot of you can figure this out, but still, a flagship is your main ship on an expedition. It is the one with the big flag on it. And those flags, which look tiny in pictures, are actually the size of an Olympic tennis court. They're very, very big. Their flagship, which is their biggest ship of the 7 ships, it runs aground. And a ton of the supplies fall into the sea and they're instantly spoiled. At this point, everyone's like, oh, that is a major setback. We're not going to be able to feed everybody. We came with 600 people. 500 of you guys, you got to go back and just bring back more supplies. You know, when you come back, bring back more supplies. But there's just simply no way we can feed everybody for a full calendar year. So they sent 5/6 of the people that they came with back. So only 1/6 remain, just 100 people remain. Immediately go and they speak with the natives on the island and they explain their situation like, hey, yeah, we were originally gonna bring more people, but we ran aground, we lost our supplies, so we might need a little bit of help just like acclimating because we're not really coming into this situation the way that we had planned around. So if you guys would be willing to help us out, that would be really awesome. And the natives, being the charitable tribe that they were like, yeah, dude, we'll totally help you guys get your bearings. We're happy that you're here. This is gonna be great. We love this diplomatic relationship. Still have our permission to settle on Roanoke. Meanwhile, the 500 men who had gone back had promised that they would be sending new supplies before winter even came. So the settlers are like, we might need some help, but like, we're supposed to have supplies by winter. And the natives are like, okay, like, you know, if you need to borrow some sugar, we're willing to give it to you, but, you know, nothing too crazy. And they're like, yeah, no, it should be fine. You know, we should be okay with the 100 people that we have. Unfortunately, though, they did not send new supplies before winter. Little did they know, supplies never came before winter because Queen Elizabeth basically just decided to veto the whole thing. She was like, this isn't very important to me. I'm more focused on things that are happening in England. I don't really care about this. You know, I was fine when you first came up with the idea and everything, but now you're asking for more stuff. I don't really want to do it. So instead of like notifying anybody, because they didn't really have any way to do that, they just hung them out to dry. So the settlers, look like they lied to the natives about more supplies coming because they're just like, I honestly don't know what happened. The natives are like, haha, okay. And they ended up leaning on the locals way more than they had promised. And so tensions were getting really high between the native leaders and the settlement leaders. And they just totally lost faith in one another. It got to such a point that the natives on Roanoke Island actually decided to evacuate to the mainland because tensions were getting so severe that they were just like, we don't want this to escalate to a place of violence, so we're just gonna remove ourselves. The settlers took this move very differently than that. They were like, oh, you guys are going to the mainland because there's other tribes on the mainland and you're gonna rally them behind you so that you can come attack us and take us out. That's what you're gonna do. And we don't actually know if that's true or not. Maybe that was what they were gonna do. We don't really have any evidence to support that. We just know that that was the paranoia of the settlement. Because of that paranoia, they decided we need to strike first. So they launched a preemptive strike on the mainland and completely took out the entire tribe. They decimated the tribe. They literally slaughtered everybody. It was a terrible situation. It was an actual genocide. Not only are they out of supplies, but they no longer have access to the people who were the only ones helping them. And on top of that, they just started a war. They don't know what the other tribes in the area are gonna do, how they're gonna react. You can't just decimate a whole group of people and have everyone go like, oh, I'm sure they had a good reason, who cares? No. Luckily for the settlers, an English ship was passing by in the channel and they like waved them down basically. They're like, hey, we need help. And everybody just rushed onto the ship. They're like, we gotta get out of here. You know, like we have totally messed up this entire situation. We have no supplies. Everybody hates us. We gotta go. And the ship is like, oh, okay, we'll take you guys. But in the frenzy, They actually end up only taking 97 people, and they leave behind 3 people because everybody's just so focused on getting out of there that they don't even do a head count, they just go. Meanwhile, Sir Walter, who had gone back with the original ship to get supplies that Queen Elizabeth had like vetoed, he actually did end up finally getting her to agree to send some supplies. But the settlers had no way of knowing this, especially because it was coming so late. They just didn't expect them at all. And so the supplies actually ended up getting there, coincidentally, just like 3 days after they totally fled the region. Since no one was there, the supply ships just sort of, you know, surveyed the situation. They were like, okay, obviously everybody has abandoned the settlement, so let's just go home. And they just turned around. A few weeks later, another British fleet passed by the colony, a completely unrelated one. They saw the colony and they were like, oh, we should go check it out. They got there, they were like, oh my God, clearly no one is here. And they obviously had to flee. I'm assuming they just ran out of food. So they decide like, we're gonna leave 15 crew members behind though, because you know, this colony might end up being really valuable to the crown. So we gotta make sure we retain this foothold. So we'll leave 15 men here, we'll send some supplies back, we'll give you some supplies right now, obviously, to last you. And you know, hopefully we can restart this colony, reinvigorate this thing, and at the very least we'll use it as a military outpost. So the 15 crew members who were there, they were essentially treating it as such. Like for them, it wasn't really like a town that they were trying to create, it was just more of an outpost until families could actually show up and turn this house into a home. So they just kind of leave these crew members there for months at a time. Meanwhile, back in Britain, there's this guy. His name is John White. He was part of the original 600 men who came to colonize Roanoke, and he's pleading with everybody. He's pleading with Sir Walter. He's like, dude, like we need to give it another go. Like, yeah, it didn't go well the first time, but like now we know exactly what to expect. I say that we go back. We don't go to Roanoke Island because obviously we have just like terrible PR there. So let's just go more north. He wanted to go to like the Chesapeake Bay area. He was like, the lands are more fertile. We haven't like totally ruined relations with the natives of the region. And you know, I think it'll be better. Like trying to live on an island, there's a lot of unknowns. The weather's intense, the winters are cold. I think something like Chesapeake Bay would be better. And so Sir Walter's like, all right, I'll let you do it. Go ahead, you go. I'm gonna stay, you go. And so he's like, cool. He's excited. He's ready to get into the colonization game. In 1587, they send out 3 ships this time because they're like, we're not gonna put as much money into this. This didn't go well the first time. It's called being a smart investor. So they send 3 ships this time, and they send John White, and they're like, do your thing. However, this is where like drama begins to ensue, because there was another man on this ship with John White. John White was the captain of the ship, but there was a navigator there, and his name was Simon Fernandez. Simon was basically just like an absolute Chad. People liked John White, you know, it's not like he was unpopular or anything. They're like, he's a nice guy. You know, he's the reason we got these 3 ships and whatnot, but Simon's just got like crazy charisma, really. We just like him more. You know, he navigated the original 600 men there. He navigated the recon trip even before that. He navigated when they brought back supplies, and he's navigating now. So like, I don't know, we just kind of feel like we trust that guy more, you know? Meanwhile, John White, he was just part of like a failed colonization effort. This guy knows the stars. I don't know. So he was like an incredible sailor, basically. So during the passage across, he just like won everybody over. And it wasn't even like a mutiny because people just sort of gravitated towards him. And John White took his L with grace, where he was just like, okay, people like Fernandez more. I get it. I like him too. It's fine. And so when they stop on the mainland, they're like, we're gonna stop at Roanoke, and you know, we're just gonna like take a break there for a second, pick up whatever we can and bring it with us, you know, see if the 15 crew members are still there. Maybe they want to come with us to the Chesapeake Bay, maybe they need supplies, you know, we should at least check in. When they get there, Fernandez is like, why check in when we could just stay? And so like before they're even like parked, he's like, all right, when we get here, everybody get out, make yourselves at home, we're staying here. And John's like, but the Chesapeake Bay. We don't care, John, let it go. All right. And he just lets it go. Even though he knows like Roanoke totally sucks. Like, at least from a settlement perspective, it totally sucked the first time. So why is it gonna be better? They're like, well, there's these 15 crewmen here, you know, they've probably made some progress, figured it out a little bit for us. So they get into the settlement, they're looking around and they're like, ooh, okay. There is just a pile of bones in the center here. It's not looking good. They get the impression that the local natives, after, you know, they genocided an entire tribe, came back for revenge and they killed these 15 crew members and left their bones in a pile as a message of like, hey, you're not welcome in Roanoke anymore. You can't just go killing entire tribes. You can't exterminate entire groups of people and expect us to be like, howdy neighbor. Anyway, despite all of this, Fernandez is still like, I don't know, I think the vibes are good. Let's stay. Feel free to get settled. We'd love that. So basically they basically are just moving into an incredibly hostile territory with like no supplies and a bad history, like no history of success actually. John White comes to the conclusion like, clearly this pile of bones is a message to us. Fernandez is like, could be. Hard to know. No way for us to know, really. They actually did know for sure. Not yet, but they would soon find out. A guy named George Howe, he was exploring a little bit. Like, he just went a little outside the general settlements area, and he got shot with 16 arrows. And they were like, hey, let this be a lesson to you. We don't want you guys here. Go somewhere else. It's not looking like a good situation, but they don't go somewhere else. They decide like, let's stick it out. However, they're like, because it's such a bad situation, John White, our leader, even though like Fernandez is our real leader, our official leader, we want you to go back to England and get some more supplies because the first group of settlers you guys brought was really militaristic and this group of settlers is just civilians, like exclusively families. So we need you to go back to England, maybe bring some guns and stuff, so that we don't die. And he's like, I really don't want to do that. I don't want to leave you guys. It's going to make me look like a weak leader. I don't want to do that. Plus, people keep having to leave Roanoke, and it never goes well. But on top of that, he had brought his pregnant daughter with him to the Roanoke settlement, and he really didn't want to leave her. She was 8 months pregnant. He was like, this is a lot. Like, I don't feel good about leaving her in the midst of her pregnancy with my grandchild. But despite this, he agrees to go because he's like, this might be our one chance to make it. But before he leaves, he makes a deal with everybody where he's like, hey, if you guys end up having to like flee this settlement, just leave me behind like a sign, leave me a clue of where you're going. So if you leave purely because you're like, this place sucks and we don't have good supplies and the land isn't fertile here, just carve into something where you're going. If you leave under duress, like you're being forced out, also carve in where you're going, but put an X next to it so I know like you left under violence. Before he left, he had written in his journal that like everybody was talking about maybe moving 50 miles north. And so he had that in his mind as he left that like, okay, when I come back, they might not be at Roanoke anymore, but hopefully they'll still be alive. They'll just be somewhere else. Unfortunately, when John White got back to England, he was informed that England had actually entered a war with Spain while he was gone. And because of this, no ships were allowed to leave England, just in case they ended up needing them. He was unable to return to the settlement for 3 years. Queen Elizabeth kind of sucks. In 1590, mind you, our boy Sir Walter only has like 1 year left of this permit. It's just been going atrociously bad the entire time. But in 1590, John White finally is able to make his way back. Queen Elizabeth is like, I'm not so worried about the Spanish Armada anymore. You can take the ship, I guess. So he goes back with supplies. They arrive at the shore of the Outer Banks. They're not at Roanoke Island yet because they got to take smaller boats to get into the Roanoke Island. But they arrive at the shore of the Outer Banks and they see fresh tracks in the sand. And so they immediately start calling out like, hey, we're here, it's me, John White. And no one's answering. So they're like, uh-oh. These tracks are a lot less likely to be friend and a lot more likely to be foe. As they're making their way towards the settlement, they see carved into a tree the letters C-R-O. And he's like, okay, There's no X though, so I'm actually feeling pretty optimistic about this. I don't know what crow means, but feeling pretty optimistic. And when they had left 3 years ago, the colony wasn't fortified at all. Like I said, this was a civilian settlement at this point. They didn't really have a lot of soldiers or anything like that there. It was mainly families. And when they returned, the colony was heavily fortified. They had created these giant pikes. You've probably seen pictures of this where they essentially take like a pine tree and they cut it all the way down. They just sharpen the tip and they put it around the entire thing. So the colony was now encircled with giant pikes. So when they got inside these pikes, they saw carved into one of them the words Croatoan. And John White, he's still optimistic. There's no X. He's like, oh, Croatoan Island, it's 50 miles south. So I'm assuming that's where they went. And as they're making their way through the settlement, there's not like bones or anything. So he's like, that's a good sign. But everything's really, really overgrown. Like it looks like they haven't been here for years. So he's thinking, all right, shortly after I left, they probably went 50 miles south to Croatoan Island. So he gets all his men. He's like, let's go south. Let's reconnect with everybody. It's gonna be great. So as they're going south, the anchor line of their ship actually snaps. So they're like, okay, well, this isn't the best situation, but you know, we're gonna keep trying to go south. And then the weather is just so terrible that eventually they're just like, John, you know, I know you haven't seen your daughter in 3 years. I know you wanna make it 50 miles south, but there's just no way we can continue in these conditions. We're just gonna have to go back to England. Which is crazy that they're like, we gotta cross the ocean instead of just going a few miles south. But I guess the conditions were truly that bad. I mean, I really don't know how things like this work, so who am I to judge? So John is like, all right, we can turn back, but he's not feeling too bad about it because he's like, there wasn't an X next to the location. So I'm sure they're just at Croatoan Island and everybody's fine. You know, I'm sure it's fine. And that's basically what he tells himself. He gets back to England and then he dies before he's able to return. So John White actually never found out like if his pregnant daughter was fine, if his grandchildren were fine, where the 115 people that he had left behind ended up, if they made it or not. He had no idea. He just died with the mystery hanging around him. But again, he was feeling optimistic about it because no X. This, however, would remain a mystery for centuries because people went down to Croatoan Island and they were like, no one's here. Yeah, the settlement doesn't exist down here. No one's here. So we don't know where these people went. And it wasn't until the 1930s that there was any sort of like clue to what could have possibly happened. There were a lot of theories. People were like, oh, they probably just got absorbed by the local tribe, which like maybe they did, although tensions were high. So I'm not sure that they would want them after, you know, what had been transpiring, but who knows, maybe they were feeling forgiving. Other people were like, oh, well, they probably just all died of famine, you know, when they were trying to switch locations, but they didn't find any remains between Roanoke Island traversing down to Croatoan Island, so they're like, well, we can't really prove that. That's just like a theory. And then again, like John had written in his journal that they were thinking about going 50 miles north into the mainland. So people were like, maybe they went there. And in 1930, this random guy, not an archaeologist or anything like this, who was just on a walk, happened to find this very important stone. And the stone had an inscription on it. It said it was from Eleanor Dare, who was John White's daughter, who was pregnant. She details what had happened to everybody. She says that half of the settlement was wiped out by the natives who were seeking revenge. The other half was taken as captives. And then there was just a couple stragglers left behind, basically just left there to die. Like, if you make it, you make it. If you don't, which we doubt you will, you don't. And that stone, like I said, the stone was found 50 miles north. But that's the total opposite direction of Croatoan Island. So people were like, why would they write Croatoan then? If they were going north, why would they write that? That's like 100 miles off course. We think this stone is fake. And basically, like, even though he had submitted it to a museum and everything, people were like, we think this guy just wants clout, we think he's lying. And people just kind of maintained that thought until 2011. Which is crazy, like such a recent update on such a cold, old case. In 2011, this same museum that possessed the stone, they would start reviewing maps because John White, he was a map maker. You know, he's an explorer. It's an important skill for an explorer to have. And it wasn't uncommon when people were making maps for them to make mistakes. I mean, I think I've seen reaction videos of like old, crazy, inaccurate maps of people being like, idiot. if I walked the coast of Alaska, I would know its exact shape to scale. But anyway, it wasn't uncommon that like as people were making maps, they would be like, oh, whoops, I made a mistake. And instead of just throwing the whole map away, they would take a square of canvas and they would just kind of cover up their mistake and redraw what it actually is. Think of it as like old-timey whiteout. Someone who was reviewing John White's maps was like, hey, 50 miles north of the Roanoke settlement, he has a patch. Let's look under the patch. That's where everyone was allegedly going. So let's look, that's where we found the stone. And when they peeled up the patch, they found something incredibly interesting, which was that he had drawn a symbol that was representative of a fort, like of a settlement. But then he had covered it up, and the patch that he had covered it up with, he had also drawn a symbol of a fort, except when he had redrawn it, he redrew it in invisible ink. So people think that he wanted to keep this settlement secret in case the map was intercepted by the Spanish, since England and Spain were at war at the time. He didn't want the map to be intercepted and then for the settlement to be at risk of invasion by the Spaniards. So archaeologists and historians, they started calling this invisible fort Site X because he used an X to mark the spot. So they went and they were like, let's dig it up, dude. Let's get digging. And as they started digging, they found native artifacts there, like pottery and other things. They also found some metal and some pottery that was indicative of a British settlement. So they were like, okay, we have both native things here and we have British things here. But what's weird, and the reason why this case is still unsolved to this day, is that even now, and like this has been most recently updated as of 2022. So it's been 10 years since they started examining Site X. Even now, to this day, from Site X to Roanoke to Croatoan Island, there have been 0 of the 115 settlers who were left behind by John White, 0 of their remains have been found. Not even a piece of one. What? That's crazy! And so even though they found like metal and pottery and stuff that indicate that like they were here at one point in time, what they really need to know for sure where these people ended up, or at least where some of them ended up, is bodies. And they have yet to find them. The fact that they haven't even found like one remain, like not even one straggler, is kind of insane. It's truly crazy, right? That is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, and that is all the updates that we have till today. So let me know what you think. What's your fan theories? What do you think happened to the Roanoke colony? Do you think it's more interesting than it sounds? Do you think it's more boring than it sounds? Were there any twists and turns in this story that you were unaware of that you now know? Let me know below. And if you don't follow me on TikTok, my main is just Daisy Foko. I have a lifestyle TikTok as well now. If you want to know what my life is like, called Daily Foko. Kind of a clever name on my part. And I don't really use Twitter or X or whatever, but I do use Threads, which is like attached to my Instagram. My Instagram is just Days, D-A-I-S, Foko. So, you know, check it out if you want, no pressure. And thank you guys so much for like actually coming to my YouTube channel, because I've seen a huge increase in subscribers in this last month and it's making me feel really good. I'm feeling like very encouraged. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys if you've interacted. Thank you for interacting. If you've subbed, thank you for subbing. If you've liked, thank you for liking. And I'll see you next Saturday. And don't forget, Mukbang Monday is coming up in just a couple days. Bye!